So a pretty basic first question, and I think, Caroline, I'll start with you because you're the eldest. First impressions of 24 Sussex. Do you remember when you first walked through the doors and what your impressions were?
I don't remember the first time I saw it. I remember Stornoway first, but I don't remember 24. But I do remember the first time I realized that I lived in such a big, huge home. It was imposing. It was so much bigger than any other home I'd been in, and we used to count all the rooms. And I think we figured there were 54 rooms, and I couldn't imagine that I couldn't believe that I lived in a house this big. So I don't have, I don't know the first time I walked through, but.
Did you count the rooms on purpose? Was this a game? Or was this just something that you guys?
I have no recollection of counting anything. But I don't remember it being that big, probably because the floors were paper thin, and my parents lived on one side of the house on the second floor, and the kids were on the third floor. But in the mornings, because my dad worked late nights, we had to stay on one side of the house, which meant Caroline would use our bathroom on our side of the house and get ready for school in my room. So I actually felt like we were on top of each other.
Yeah.
Using Ben's bathroom.
And it was Mark's too. You had your own.
Well, were you on the third floor because your parents were trying to give you some element of privacy, or were you so rambunctious that they wanted to just?
I think they wanted us to be together. I think that was pretty much how it worked. Ben was blue room at the end of one hall. I was red room at the end, and Caroline was the trusted one who was allowed to stay over my parents' room because she was trusted not to make a lot of noise or burn the house down over their room. And then Nicolas was just down the hall from them, so.
And did you guys remember if you got to choose your own rooms? Sometimes when you move into a house and you walk through the house and
No.
We didn't get to choose our own rooms, and I don't think we had a say in designing what the rooms looked like.
But
I did eventually. I did eventually.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
See,
Mark
she was
had
the
a say.
preferred
You had a
child.
say at one point.
Well, I had to say on designing the room because I drew all over the wallpaper, so we had to kind of redesign the room because it looked weird because I had drawn all over his
That's the one
wallpaper.
he got blamed for.
Yes,
Thank you.
Nice.
not mine.
So who decorated your rooms?
Mom.
Okay.
Wallpaper, red checks, blue checks.
Nice.
What about me?
Yours had a crib.
Did you like the house? Was it a nice place to live?
I think when we were kids, it was a great house. We had a pool. We had all these different rooms we could explore and play in. There was a safe that was hidden behind a painting. We never got in the safe, but it was just cool to know there was a safe in the house.
I got in the safe.
You got in the safe? What was in it?
And there's
How'd you get in the safe?
I found the code. It was at Dad's desk.
Security was terrible in that house.
and there was an elevator.
And there was an elevator.
Like there's stairs leading everywhere. That's like when you're a kid. It's like saying you don't like Halloween because it's raining. Like nobody remembers when it rains. In this case, there's stairs leading everywhere. So we were just running around. We could go. The basement was big, and then there was space to go upstairs. And the rooms, everybody kind of remembers. Caroline remembers 54 of them. I think we just remember that it was vast, and you could run around. You could play hide and go seek, and we always could have friends over. So it was a great time.
I realized when we left, people would talk about how it's an old house and it's crumbling and it's falling down, but we loved it. It was our home for a long time, and we had a lot of fun there. And it was because it was so big, as Mark says, we would run around. We sort of had free reign, and there's the tunnel underneath connecting to the pool, which we'd bowl there. We'd go
Hockey.
play.
It
They
wasn't
play
a bowling
hockey.
alley. We just made it.
We'd made it into a
We made it
bowling alley. You'd set the pins up, and there was a sauna by the pool. We had the best birthday parties because we just had this other part of the house that was separated from the main house. We could be loud, and it was so much fun.
Were you able to have kids over, friends over? You know how now we welcome our kids' friends into the house and you say, okay, go play. Was it the same for you guys? Were you actually able to just invite people over and play?
It required a little more work. It required a little forewarning and announcing. People couldn't just show up at the gate and say, I want to come in and play. But yeah, we had friends over all the time. A lot of birthday parties.
The basement was designed for that, though.
Yeah.
We had what ended up happening is because we would go to Harrington for the weekend, or we'd say we each kind of started to have designated friends that it was okay for them to spend, let's say, come stay over for 2 nights and then come back on Sunday or something if they go. So we each kind of had our friends that would come over for a sleepover and then come to Harrington and then go back. So we didn't always have, let's say, a different friend all the time, but a lot of us grew up with friends who spent a bunch of time there. So.
Okay. Did you feel that you guys had to behave in a certain way because you knew it was an official residence?
No.
No.
Yeah, again, back to the checks on the wall. Mark decided that this was the world's greatest tic-tac-toe board and would play tic-tac-toe on my wall in my room. And I got blamed for it, but when we stood next to the actual crime scene, it was at Mark's eye level. Despite that, he still denied it.
As you can see, he's clearly over this.
I am not over it. But we were allowed to be kids in that house.
Yeah, I mean, if there were official events going on, you know, all that would happen on the main floor and sometimes on the second floor, and we knew that we had to be quiet. But you know, our parents were very easy. You know, they were welcoming. We would come in and out of receptions if we needed to talk to them or ask them questions. So we still got to move around even when they were working. Dad had his den right on the first floor, and so if the door was closed, then we knew that, you know, we'd have to knock, or somebody would probably be there already telling us what was going on. He always wanted us to come in, knock when we came home from school. He always wanted us to say hello. So around that time, there'd be somebody to let us know whether it was okay to go in or not. But, you know, so we were respectful of the work that was happening, or the meetings, the receptions. But other than that, it was, you know, just where we lived.
Wasn't there a time when there was a reception at the house and everyone was moving into the dining room and Mark was sitting on the stairs? I think Princess Di was there.
Nicolas and I in our PJs. Yeah, exactly. The one-piecers, that's always
so
cool.
they were sitting on the stairs, and I think Princess Di noticed them and walked up
Right.
the stairs and asked them.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do the British accent, but she did,
Come on, it works.
did possibly say something like, how I wish I could come upstairs and watch television with you.
I'm
A
sure she
fond
truly
memory.
meant it. Did she come in your pajamas?
Yes, well, they were pretty hip pajamas for the time, I think.
From
So
what I'm told, they were pretty snazzy.
So you were born into the house. So it would have been all that you knew. I mean, you essentially, until you moved out in '93, it was simply your home. Do you remember, and people always say this, and so I apologize for having to ask this question, but, you know, people say, what was it like being the child of a former prime minister or politician? But what was it like being the child of a former politician, prime minister, living in the house?
Great setup.
So for me, I've never known my dad as anything but the Prime Minister of Canada. I was born into it, as you said, and so I never knew him previously to that point. So for me, it's normal. Like, I know nothing else. He always made time for me. I only remember great things from the house and our time together, and so I can't really say now that he's out of office is it any different, but definitely made my life growing up a lot more interesting.
Were you guys able to choose what you wanted to eat, or did you have set meals?
Sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Oh, something. I think
Weekends.
something pretty cool happened. Like there was the time somewhere in there, and I can't really figure out the date. There was a reno of the kitchen that happened. It wasn't a big reno, but I just remember there was this thing that was added to the kitchen, and they could make nachos.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we could have
Like a
nachos.
boiler, like an open.
Every day
yeah.
when he came back
Every
from
day
school.
you could have a pile of nachos.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, as a kid,
Yeah.
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh, have a cookie? No, I'll have nachos.
Yeah, no, there was. I don't think we got to pick the menu during the week.
But it's pretty basic. Like we never.
We had cherry soup once.
You weren't there. You missed it.
I did.
It was cherry,
Yeah.
and a soup, and cold.
Yeah, it was cold cherry soup. What
So
the
you
hell
had
is
to
that?
eat kind of
So there was
adult food.
Yeah, there was a staff that they would cook dinner during the week, and on the weekends, my mom would get more involved in the kitchen. But the kitchen at Sussex is a lot more formal, and it's where the people who work there sort of hang out. So it's not like
It wasn't our domain.
It wasn't really, and that, you know, that's sort of the one area where, you know, we walked in and out, and you know, there was a pantry, so we helped ourselves. But menus were sort of set during the week. We could, you know, influence the menu. And I did that for a little while. I kept putting my favorite right on the menu until my dad realized he was having it. You know, he's having it 3 or 4 times
Here's
a week.
scallopini with cheese. Oh.
So, but you know, which was great because you know they recognized it was a family home too, and they integrated us into their, into their work, and took our likes and dislikes into consideration, which was really nice.
But we had to help set the table, and once we were done eating, we would clear the table as
Yeah.
well. We wouldn't just sit there and be served. It was even though we would sit in the dining room, the kids still had responsibilities and chores.
There was some fun stuff around the setting of the table too.
About where people had to
Well,
sit.
so the way it worked is Nick was just born, and so there were 2 spots, 1 spot, and then mom and dad. And that 1 spot alone was really the coveted spot. And so after you'd set it, you would run down and try to get to that seat first. That was the key, was to get that seat first. And clearly I never really got it. Well, no, sometimes I'd get it, but it was mostly reserved for
Caroline.
So
Okay,
in,
reserved for
in the dining room, the dining room is very big, and then there's an alcove, and there was a smaller table in there. So there's a table that would sit like 40 or 50 people, and that's where big dinners would occur. And then at this smaller one, you could fit 6 people. So that's where we would have some of our dinners if.
A lot of them.
Yeah, well, that's where we had a lot of them. There's another smaller one off the kitchen, and we would eat in there occasionally. But as our family got bigger, like as they got taller, that room got to be a little too crowded. So we started having more and more in the bigger dining room.
So at the table, sorry to interrupt, but at that big.
Not at the big
No,
one.
you
no,
would
right
sit in
off
the alcove.
The alcove, the one that
Okay.
was closest to the river.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the reason that that cherished position at the table was so important, it was because it was closer to my dad, and he wouldn't take as much of an interest in whether or not you were eating. So if you didn't like the food, he would just want to get, he's a fast eater, and he wanted to have our dinner and have our conversation, but he had to get back to work. My mom, however, was the one who was really, why aren't you eating your food? And so if you sat next to her, you ran a greater risk of eating something you didn't want to eat. And so every night that we had dinner together, this was the gambit. Who could sit next to the guy who really wasn't going to tell you to eat?
Ben had the problem of being the guy who didn't eat as well.
I was
So
a picky eater.
You sound like you had a totally normal sibling dynamic. Like, did you also fight? Did you also argue with each other in the same way?
I really want to get here.
It's about the residences.
Well, I mean that in terms of like, did you feel comfortable enough in the house that you actually behaved the way that kids behave in their normal homes every day with their siblings?
I mean, mom is everybody that normal term of normal relationship, but like my mom was on us for things and was as strict as a mom has to be, and so we operated within her rules. You could have taken us and put us in any house, and we would have operated that way. That's just my mom.
I'm sure there were times when the people who were working there, because it's a working home, that I'm sure whatever we were fighting about, if we were a little loud or running around or appealing to our parents to intervene, I'm sure it was annoying for them. And I can't think of a specific instance, but I know that because we became so close with so many of the people who worked with our parents, that they did intervene themselves to try to help us. We would appeal to them. So it was our home. It's just it was very different from probably the way from the way most people grew up, because there were people trying to conduct serious business. From when we come home from school from 3 to 7. When a home. Now that I have children, I know how loud it is at that time, and there were some important things going on in that house at that time. So. I'm sure it was challenging for them. You should interview them and ask them what it was
We may
like
try.
to be with us.
But you bring up a really important point too about staff working in the home, because that's another dynamic to politics that people who haven't existed within it may not understand, that the people who work with your family, either within the house or in the office, do become like an extended family. So when you left the residence, what was the feeling for you guys when you were leaving behind the staff who had worked with you there for almost a decade? I'll let you talk, Nicolas, because you haven't.
Well, you see, I don't have that great of a memory on this one, but I remember that I grew up with a nurse and a nanny, and I still speak to her regularly, and Kathy's still part of my life. And there were a lot of members of the staff that ended up coming with us to Montreal, and I felt like we still have a few people working with us to this day.
I think that's pretty fair to say that there were, let's say, I don't know what the number was exactly, but at the point you've done 10 years of work, a lot of people chose to retire, and let's say 2 of them were already moving back to Montreal because they had moved with us. They were close to our family growing up, and then a couple of ladies just said, can we come with you with your family? Because we were still just that. We were still a big bustling family that was moving. Caroline was at school and Ben was at school, but a lot of us were still there and coming back and forth. So bringing people, particularly Eileen, who was with us, who's still with our family.
Yeah.
She's been there forever. So
She predates Nick.
She's our Barbadian princess.
Yeah, she predates you.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
But
for
I think
sure.
there are a lot of people who were working, for the PMO or, various parts of the government who would come in and out. And I think when you grow up, and, as the eldest, I was very sort of, I started reading the papers and started understanding what kind of work was going on. And of course, we were very attuned to, a lot of the big events. So you grow up with this, so much energy. There's a lot of energy at 24 when things are very busy. And then you move to a regular house, and it's not a letdown in any way. It's just a transition, because there were always a lot of people around us all the time. And then we all get along great, but to just be together all the time, it was just a different way of living. And my mom loves to cook, and so she's always been somebody who's always been in the kitchen and preparing things for my dad and for us, and we had to learn to cook as well. But I remember when we left office and we went we were at a chalet, and my dad said, he was on the phone. He said, "Would you ask them to bring me a cup of coffee?" And I looked at him and I said, "Well, there is no us anymore. It's just me." And I'm
them.
I'm them. I'm happy to get it for you, but just, this
To
is
be clear.
Just to be clear, there's nobody in the kitchen right now. And so there was a bit of an adjustment for us, And so when I think back to that time when you come home from school and there'd be 12 people working on something, and Dad was on the phone, and it was exciting. It was really great to come home to that, and I think that's one of the reasons I'm so comfortable with a very busy home and household, and I love having people in and out all the time because it's how we grew up.
But when we moved back to Montreal, it was a little bit of a shock, speaking of the transition, when friends of ours would just knock on the door and say, "Hey, I want to come in," or "I want to get one of the kids to go out." My parents, at first, it took them a little bit of time to appreciate, well, why didn't they call ahead? So, well, they don't need to anymore. They just ring the doorbell. That's what people do at regular homes. And so there was a little transition. I think for us, it might have been a little bit easier in that at the time that we left, that's a time when kids are transitioning naturally anyway, moving from one part of school to high school or from high school to university. And so there was a natural transition occurring anyway. And I didn't feel too much like a fish out of water. There were changes, but I was going through awkward changes anyway. Mm-hmm. Puberty. Woo!
But they did change the gates when we were there, because I've been back. The gates, people, you couldn't just show up at the gates and come in, but security was different back then. So you could go and maybe get the RCMP's attention, because they have the security houses right there. But it wasn't as built out back then, and I think it was just a little bit.
I could fit through the bars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you try?
Oh, we did all the time,
There
for
was-
sure.
Security was not what it is today. Well, no capital S at security.
Oh yeah, the
You
back
could
gate-
run down the back gate down
gate
to the
to the
water,
French embassy.
and
The
then
gate was up to
you
your
go all the way down
hips.
to. It's easy, yeah,
Yeah.
no problem. We could go into the French embassy, you go all over.
Well,
Never anybody stopped me.
When we
We can't
first
do it
got
now.
there, security at 24 Sussex amounted to having a Crown Vic at one end of the semicircle. You'd come in one gate and exit the other. There was a Crown Vic at one end with 2 RCMP and a Crown Vic at the other. And if you wanted to get into the Prime Minister's residence, you'd flash your high beams or you'd wave at the cop and he'd look at you. And if, I don't know by what criteria they established that they would let you in, they'd come up, open the gate, let you in. And then the other guy on the other end would let you out. That was security in
We'd have
1983.
if we had friends, we'd tell them at the gate to expect our friends, and so there was that kind of.
No, I think what happened is that the RCMP then had this huge group of kids. Like it went from like, You know, I think from this point there were then 3 kids who were a little more active in this case, and then on top of that, my mom was active, and so they created a detail which had not, I don't think, existed before that.
The PMPD?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know.
So no, but I think the number I remember was something like there were 20 people looking after the Prime Minister, and then it went up to 50 or something. So just the number just became bigger, and then protection was picked up personally. But around the house, it was no one really thought of it conceptually. It wasn't what it is today because people weren't trying to break into the house or nothing was happening.
After Soapstone and 9/11, that's when it changed. That's when they've got.
But literally, there was a little gate that was up to here for me and you could just jump over or walk down to the to the Ottawa River and you could keep going. At one point, you're like, is anybody going to come look for me? Like,
Did you do it as like a dare?
no, we just do it for
just
fun to do. It's a Tuesday.
So, did you ever have the experience where you came down and you found a visiting head of state in the kitchen, or not the kitchen, but the
The
dining room?
Gorbachev signed my cast once. That was pretty cool. That was actually, interestingly enough, I had a cast, which I still have somewhere, which has all the signatures to Meech Lake on it.
Yep.
Thank you very much. And so they signed something together. We don't need to get into that. It's about the residences. But then right here I have Gorbachev, and he got down on literally on one knee and felt it because he had never really seen it. Clearly the myth of the cast had made it all the way to Moscow, but he went down to feel it, and I have a picture of that.
How'd you break your?
I was fake. I think I wanted a few days off school. My leg was just fine. I just told him I broke it, so no.
But yeah, there would be a lot of receptions where people, all the first ministers would come, or Gorbachev would come, or...
Remember when Salinas' kids came to town for NAFTA? And we had to have dinner with them downstairs, and none of them spoke English, but the daughter was so pretty. So pretty. That's the story now.
So, back to the decorating of the rooms. You were saying your mom did it, but were you guys even able to put up posters? Or?
Sure.
Yeah, you could do.
We weren't getting stopped from that, but the idea that is okay, what are you feeling for this color? That's
But
not
that has
really.
more to do with our mother than
Yeah,
what
posters
it's
had to
like.
have masking tape so it wouldn't dent the wallpaper.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's just. but I was 10 when we moved in, so it's not like I'm going to make choices at that point. And
You had a bust of Elvis.
I was 5.
yeah.
No, I had busted
So,
later in life.
Mom made those choices, and
Poster
then
should be on the back of the door.
Yes.
So that when people, if they come see your room, if you're giving a tour of your clean room,
but
then there'll be a poster
there were a
on the
lot
back.
of tours.
Yes.
There were a
Yes.
lot of tours.
Spot and a tour is code word for spot inspection.
Like people would say, oh, I'm visiting, I'm a family friend, I'm visiting from New Brunswick, I want to come, where do you guys live? Come on up, let's go. And we loved it. It was great. People would come up, they usually have kids or they have stories, we go. So these rooms, we were keeping this
But
pretty.
often there'd be a big rush up the stairs to clean the rooms.
Oh my God, clean your room!
Sorry, hang on. You'd have people who would come to the house who are visitors,
Yes.
like legitimate visitors, but then who would say, "Can I have a tour?"
Well, I just
essentially?
think, I don't know how what's going on today or how it was for anybody else, but I can say my parents were having 50 to 60 parties for Canadians, people from different groups at different areas around the country they were opening the house to them, and we were included in that. We might have been in PJs, or we might have been coming back from school, or we might have been anything, but the truth is that was how we were. So the whole house was open to anybody. So it was, hey, let's go upstairs and see what's going on. Where do the kids live? Oh, I'll take you. Oh, you want to see the backyard? Great, come see the backyard. So,
And then every now and then Caroline and I might have to give a recital on the piano. And if we were, I don't know, Caroline and I both took piano lessons, and so they'd say, oh, Ben can sit at the piano and play something, and I could not. And so he just,
still had to.
and I'd try, and he'd just sit there shaking his head in the background. 10 years he's been playing.
But my mom always said to us that, to remember that this was not our house, that this is where we lived because of Dad's job, and we would be leaving and returning to a more normal size abode.
it wasn't something that she said all the time, but this was said, and I think that's what
Yeah.
made the transition so easy when we went back to Montreal, because
We didn't feel like it's where we lived. We loved being there, but it wasn't our home. It was.
Yeah, the memories were coming with us. We didn't. I never felt like we were leaving.
nobody's told Nick that one yet, though.
When you came home from school, could you just drop your stuff?
Yeah.
Could you just leave it in the front entrance, like school bags?
Or
Always give you
interestingly, we used the mud room.
Okay.
But interestingly, you drop your bag and then you quickly make a human chair and have to carry Caroline upstairs.
But that's, again, this is not to do with
Caroline
the
was a bit of the
residences.
princess, so we'd have to carry her
Yeah,
up
the
3
Roman
flights of-
chair, like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Mark and I would do
Prove
this.
your strength to your sister.
Yes, show us how much you love me.
But I think when we walked in the back door, there were like places,
There's cubbies and
there were
things,
cubbies where we could
Yeah.
put our things. Then you go up the first little set of stairs, and that's where the pantry was.
grab
So
something
that's
there.
where you get the
Nachos?
snacks.
Followed by-
No, that's in the kitchen, the special oven.
Followed by Roman chair all the way
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
Deliberately, did you want this?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Do you think we chose to do this?
She's a sweet one now. Back then, things were different. But again, about the residences. Speaking of which, can I tell a quick little story? Okay, you know the original Trivial Pursuit. Right? Trivial Pursuit is originally a Canadian game. And there was, in that game, a great many Canadian questions. And one of the questions that I once got playing was, when you first walk into the residence of the Prime Minister of Canada at 24 Sussex, where's the first bathroom, to your left or to your right? Now, if you go in the front door, it is to your right, because there's a closet, and then it's sort of just beyond that.
Yeah, the men's
Yeah,
and then the women's.
and then
to
if
the
you
left.
go in the back door, it's, well, you'd have to go down a whole way, so it wouldn't be. It'd be through the front door. And so I said, it's to your right. The card says it's to your left, and the person wouldn't give me a pie. Even though I live there.
Still
That
with you.
isn't fair.
That's a good aside, though. I appreciate that one. Yeah.
Unhappy elements of it? Were there any elements of it that made being a kid there difficult?
No.
No.
I'll tell you that I did see a car accident once on my birthday. Some parent was picking up their child at my birthday, and the guy kind of caught dad and mom coming out of the house, and he wasn't looking, and fender bender. I think it's probably the only car accident on the premises.
But we had the ability, they had this modern art that was part of the grounds. And as kids, you didn't see modern art, you saw a jungle gym.
Yeah, the white statue.
Yeah, the white statue. So as a kid, you had these huge grounds where you could play. I mean, we had our own park. That's really what it was as a kid. And we always had a dog in the house, and so the dogs were always able to run around. And no, as a kid, this was a playground. It was wonderful. Caroline hosted an event for an AIDS hospice and turned the front lawn.
Yeah, we did a big event, and volleyball tournament, band, and everything, and it was amazing. And
There was a negative there, though.
Didn't your mom break her?
yeah, my
Yeah, that was a
mom
negative,
broke
yeah.
her ankle playing volleyball.
But refused to leave because she didn't want to detract from the event, so stood there with a broken ankle for another.
Didn't Ben win something?
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
that's
won the
right.
raffle.
Whenever I organized some kind of charity raffle or something, one of
Forced
my
me to buy
brother-
tickets, and then when I won, wouldn't give me the prize. And did I win once? No. I won twice, and still had to give the prize.
Yeah, and he's over it, clearly.
But I think, I mean, being a 16-year-old girl in a big house like that behind gates with Mounties guarding it, probably not the coolest thing. But, as we discussed, we didn't really know any different. It is what it,
Your social life was rocking.
Right. I mean, the fact that you had to give somebody's name beforehand, and Mounties had to look at the name, you had to run it by people. It was probably not the ideal way to be 16. But
There were no say anything moments in your life. The guy standing outside with a boombox.
there were no say anything. But as it was, just that was what what our lives were like at the time, and
Yeah, when you don't know any different, it's exactly like anybody else's.
You talked about having to set the table, clear the table. Did you guys have other chores that you had to do within the house? Were there expectations?
And keeping the rooms excessively clean was also something. A lot of that was just shoving it under your bed, but that's clean for kids.
Homework had to be done, and there was a lot of homework from our school. Homework had to be done almost immediately coming home. There was no TV during the week.
but there were no
It would
household
almost-
chores
It would
really.
be ridiculous to ask us to rake the leaves because that would take
Well, the
17
NCC
days.
wouldn't have let us
Yes,
do it.
Exactly.
There was one time when I wanted to buy a poster, and it cost, I don't know, $60 or something. And so I asked my mother for the money, and she said, sure, but you're going to have to work for it. I said, well, how am I going to work for it? And she said, I think I was 14 or something. She said,
Is this the ballet slippers poster?
yes. And she said, well, you're going to have to clean the kitchen. I said, but there are a number of people who work in the kitchen. And so I'd have to ask them to step aside so that I could clean the oven and clean the stove. And I had to do that week after week after week to earn the $60. So that was awkward, actually, trying to do all these extra chores when they were standing there, watching,
Knowing that they were
laughing,
going to go back and fix what you were doing.
yes, judging me. But Yeah, so I mean, we did sort of basic kind of get your allowance kind of chores, but clearly the allowance was not sufficient. Purchase the poster, but that was pretty much it.
Did you feel awkward asking people to come back to your house? Your 6 friends?
No, I never. I mean, it was my house. It was my home. And I think our friends. I mean, don't forget when people would call the house, and it's not just showing up. When people call the house, they don't just call a phone number. They called 992-4211, which was the number for the Prime Minister's office. That's sort of the
It
switchboard.
still is, so remember that, people.
You're gonna have to beep it out. Yeah, and then the phone would ring at the phone would ring at a switchboard, and they would say, "I'm calling for so and so," and then the switchboard would put it through to the house. So everything about it was different. But I guess our friends, I mean, kids are adaptable, and if it was something different, they'd get used to it. I think our friends got used to calling
And we
the
went
switchboard.
to the same school for a long time, so our friends, we had the same friends for a long time, so they were sort of used to the whole.
So let me be clear though. Say I wanted to call and say, hey, can I come hang out or whatever. I'm going to call the PMO number,
992-4211.
and then I'm going to ask what to speak to one of you,
Yes.
and then they will put me through to the house,
And somebody at the house picks up the phone,
and then I ask for you.
and you wait 10 minutes until they can find us.
You had to wait on hold forever because you didn't know where people
You know what it was? We didn't have an intercom system. You just had to guess.
So would you yell?
No,
Would you
we
yell
weren't allowed
like-
yelling in the house.
Phone?
Oh, please, there
None?
was some yelling.
No, we did, but then we'd get
Well, there was
screamed at.
There was a speaker, but we weren't really
Yeah, we weren't
supposed
allowed
to
to
use it.
You had a speaker that you could use for different
It was
floors.
on the phone.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
So instead, when the phone had gone through
You would
this
page
person,
to that area, say, hey, phone's for you.
Hoping that the person was in that area, and if not, we'd page another area. This could go on for a while.
There were 54 rooms.
This is the 80s.